Welcome to HCC's webinar on private insurance. This is part of a series that we're doing all year that's covering health access, health advocacy, and health policy to help patients be able to better access resources and advocate for themselves. Today, our speaker, Michelle Rice from NHF, will outline changes coming to private insurance, as well as both standard private insurance and self-funded plans through employers, resources for patients, and opportunities for patients to advocate for themselves. I also want to take a moment to thank the sponsors that are supporting this series this year, Takeda and Sanofi Genzyme. Thank you so much for supporting our program.
But I want to stress that as patients, we have a role in our access to care. And we have two choices. We can be reactive to the changes that payers are making, or we can be proactive. And I'm going to explain a little bit about what I mean by that. So, for example, you're denied coverage or you're unhappy with the care you've received. What can you do? I think sometimes we believe that the insurance company has the ability to make these rules. They make the rules. If they deny us, there's nothing we can do. Well, that's not true. If you receive a denial for a requested service or medication, or if you're unhappy with a service you receive under your health plan, for example, I'm required to go to this one physician, and every time I go there, I have a 60-minute wait before I get in to see them. Or every time I go, it requires multiple tests. And, I have to, it's not just one visit, it's always 2 or 3 visits. You have the ability to file either an appeal or a grievance. And the difference between an appeal and a grievance is an appeal is a request to reconsider a decision made that denies coverage or restricts approval for a healthcare service. And that's one that your doctor has recommended for you or that you have requested. A grievance is a complaint about the quality of the health care you received or how it was delivered. Again, for example, every time I go to this doctor, I have to wait for 60 minutes before I'm seen. Or you contact your health plan and you ask a question about coverage and they promise to call you back, but they don't. And therefore you don't get the information you need. Those are opportunities to file what we call a grievance. So I want to talk a little bit about what your rights are to appeal. But the first thing I'm going to say is, and any of you who've ever seen a presentation I've given before, I always say, always open your mail from your insurer. A lot of times if they send you a denial or if they're sending you information about a change in coverage, all that's required is that they send you a letter. If you don't open it and you don't know, that's not a defense against whatever the rule change is or whatever the denial is. And the reason why it's important to open for a denial is because there's time frames involved. So under the Affordable Care Act, it says that when a plan denies a claim, they have to notify you of a few different things. The first is the reason the claim was denied. Then they need to explain to you that you have a right to request an internal appeal and your right to request an external appeal if your internal appeal is denied. They're also supposed to share with you the availability of any consumer assistance programs or CAP programs that may be able to help you file an appeal or request a review if your state has such a program. And then finally, if English is not your first language, you may be entitled to receive the appeals information in your native language, but that's upon request. So what are your rights to an internal appeal? It's important to know that an internal appeal can be requested up to 6 months from the date of your denial of coverage or payment for service. And the health plan then has to give you its decision on that appeal within 72 hours for an appeal of a denial of a claim for urgent care. 30 days, within 30 days for denials of non-urgent care that you have not yet received, or 60 days for denial of services you've already received. Now, what's interesting about that is a lot of times we think, how is it I can get a denial for a service I've already received? I talked earlier about pre-certification. Sometimes when you get a pre-certification, it will say at the bottom of your letter or at the end of the call where you've called to get a pre-certification, it will say pre-certification is not a guarantee of payment. What that means is when a pre-certification goes in, your physician is sending in a code saying this is the service we're going to be providing. The best example for me is when you go in for a colonoscopy screening. And the physician does that, but let's say during that screening they find a polyp. They decide to remove that, send it off for testing, and then when they send the bill in, they don't send the bill in for a colonoscopy screening. They send the bill in related to, looking at the pathology of this polyp. You may get a denial initially, and part of that is, because that's not what you were pre-certified for. So again, if you receive a denial on something that you think you were pre-certified for, I always recommend that you contact your payer and you say, can you tell me why this was denied? If they can say, well, this is a different billing code was used, you can often call your provider's office and share that information with them, and they have the opportunity to rebill, and a lot of times that ends up getting paid. So just keep that in mind. Also, a special note on here is when we're talking about a denial of a claim for urgent care, it's important to note that all levels of internal appeals have to be completed within that time frame, the 72 hours. However, some group plans, some employer plans may require more than one level of internal appeal. And so they may make you go through that internal appeal process a couple of times before they will let you send it out for an external appeal. So it's important for you to, again, open that letter that comes from the payer and let you know whether your requested service has been approved or denied, and if it's denied, what are your appeal rights. Advocating for the coverage you need. What I will tell you is a lot of times when you have an appeal done, it's typically your physician's office who is doing that appeal, or the hospital if you're at a hospital, or a pharmacy. Many times they are already working on that because they've gotten a notice about a denial as well. But the first thing I would encourage you to do when you get a letter that states there's been a denial of service is to reach out to whoever the prescribing physician is. Ask them if they're aware that this has been denied. If they say yes, ask them what they've done so far. If they say no, provide them with a copy of the denial you've received and ask them to contact your insurer and request a peer-to-peer review to talk about the specific reasons why they believe you need the specific medication and or service. A lot of times this will resolve the issue and you won't ever have to go through the official appeal process. And remember, you have 6 months to appeal. So you can do this immediately, and sometimes you can get on that, there's a way to develop or to set up a peer-to-peer call within a week or 2 weeks. This would be a faster way to get through that process when it works. If after a peer-to-peer review, they continue to say, nope, the claim is denied, you have the right now to appeal that decision in writing. Again, you have 6 months to do that. But you can find the information on the appeals process in your plan documents or by contacting the customer services number on the back of your card. Or they should have outlined it to you in their letter of denial. When you're filing these appeals, they'll typically have a form that they ask you to do, or they'll ask you to submit a letter. One of the things that I will tell you is to make your words count. really just include the pertinent information for that particular service or that particular medication. Be sure that you are writing it in clear, simple language and including information like, clinical information regarding your health and medication history. Always ask your physician if they can provide you with copies of some of your medical records related to whatever the issue is. If requesting a medication, include information on other drugs or dosages that you may have tried or considered trying, but that your doctor or you felt would have been ineffective or cause harm, and maybe say why. For example, you might say, in the past I've tried this drug, but I realized I have an allergy to that drug, so my doctor now has me use this drug instead. So make sure you're including any history of any adverse reactions or side effects you've had to similar medications or to generics that may not have been effective. And always include that letter of medical necessity from your physician. Sometimes your physician is willing to work with you to prepare this, and you don't have to send anything separate if you know that the physician is sending their appeal in as well. And this is a big one. Remembering that how you say it matters. And so we have a really good example here of how sometimes words have different meaning to different people. And this can lead to both frustration and confusion. So for example, if you look at the term cost and you say to a provider, what is the cost of this drug or this service? A provider will say that's the expense incurred to deliver a healthcare service to a patient. A payer will say, no, cost is the amount we pay to providers for services they've rendered. Patients, when you talk about cost, will say this is the amount they pay out of their pocket for healthcare services. So you can see how one word has a big difference. A good example is now that there are multiple products out there, many of us may have gone through a product change at one time or another. And maybe it was because, we had a child who had poor venous access and we didn't want to have to infuse him every other day. So we said, you know what, we're going to try this product that will allow us to do this twice a week. Or we're going to try this product that will allow us to do it twice a month. It's important to remember when talking to a payer about why you need something, that you really remember what is the reason why, rather than saying, a good example is we may call them and say, I need to switch to this product because it's going to be easier. Well, what that payer hears is a sense of entitlement and a sense of convenience for you. And not that convenience doesn't matter, but when costs are very, very high, they are looking for, you need to tell me why this is a big deal for you, versus you calling and saying, my child has, a bleeding disorder. Currently, we are infusing every other day. The product that we are taking requires, me to infuse X number of units. His veins blow very easily, which leads to distress for him. And sometimes I end up not even being able to get in all of the medication. Therefore, I know he's not really being adherent to his treatment regimen. Hopefully you can tell the difference. I'm saying how that may come across differently to a payer than saying, I really need this. It's going to be a lot more convenient for me, or it's going to be easier for me. The difference was when you explained why you needed it and said, okay, I'm not going to be able to be compliant with my treatment regimen. Payers know that lack of compliance is one of the biggest reasons for increase in healthcare costs. So when you say it that way, they're like, oh, this person's trying to be a good steward of their healthcare dollar. So again, the way you say it matters. Another thing that I want to point out that I missed on the earlier slide when I talked to you about having an internal appeal right, and I said you also have an external appeal right. An internal appeal is done by someone who works for or is employed by the health insurance provider. An external appeal is where the decision is made by someone who is outside of the health plan, maybe another expert in that field reviews it, but they are not under the employ of the health insurer. Typically, you would do your internal appeal first. If it's denied, then you would do your external appeal. However, in the event of an emergency service that you need, you can ask for your internal and external appeal to be done simultaneously. So just wanted to share that as well. So what does this all mean for you moving forward and moving towards open enrollment for 2020? It's kind of the whole buyer beware, shop carefully. I always tell people, you know, I may go to 10 stores in the mall to find the best price on a sweater in exactly the color I want it and the style I want it. You need to think about that with your insurance too. You want to make sure that you are spending the time and energy to make sure that the product you're choosing, the health plan you're choosing, covers not only your hemophilia care, but covers the care for anyone else who may be in your family and whatever their situations are. You want to make sure that this plan addresses your entire family need if it's going to be a family plan. Don't be tricked by buying a plan just because it costs less. Because number one, it may look like it costs less because the premium is lower. But often that means that then your copays are a little bit higher, or there's other services that may not be covered. So again, always make sure that you are fully reviewing your plan. Ask questions, you know, are prescription drugs covered? Do I have access to the providers I need? Are there any limits on the services or drugs? And while we encourage you to work with your hemophilia treatment center, social workers or nurses when you're looking at health plan options, or we encourage you to work with the council, or we encourage you to work with your chapter, only you know what your healthcare needs are. And so be a little bit careful when someone recommends something to you, or you have a family member or someone else with hemophilia who says, oh yeah, I always use Anthem, I get great coverage from them. Remember, Anthem may have 200 different health plans. So unless you're getting on the exact same plan as your cousin or your friend, and unless your healthcare needs and your family's healthcare needs match his or her healthcare needs and family needs, you may still find that that plan is not the right plan for you. Again, call your HTC social worker or chapter for help in navigating the plans or working with the council. Don't wait until the last minute to shop. You know, studies show that most people spend only about a half an hour looking at their health plan options. I would suggest to you that if you're spending under an hour, you are not fully reviewing your health plan option. You should be prepared that the premiums will probably be higher next year. So you should be planning accordingly for that. And if your premiums aren't higher, your out-of-pockets may be. And then most important is be aware of your appeal rights. I know that a lot of us, and I can say this from personal experience, I feel like I spend enough time dealing with hemophilia, dealing with doctors, dealing with appointments, dealing with, you know, infusions, that the thought of going through and filing an appeal and having to take the time to do that is very distressful to me. And sometimes I'll think, well, maybe I can just go to somebody for help getting that bill paid, or, you know, we can, you know, there's maybe I can just go ahead and pay this. It's not that much. You really do want to get into the habit of, you know, appealing these decisions, especially when it's something that you really need and that you may need again in the future. You want to make sure you have a good understanding of if and when that type of service is going to be covered.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for bringing all that information and your troubleshooting of those questions.
Well, you all have a great rest of your week.
Thank you again to Takeda and Sanofi Genzyme for sponsoring our 2019 webinar series. Thank you, Michelle.